always the first thing is adjusting the microphone from Fred. I have my notes in case I get lost. What you might have seen beforehand was the speakers. We had a quick discussion around whether we start happy or sad. The vote went sad, which is why I'm here. And it's kind of it's my standard approach to influencer marketing. And when I talk about it, and when I meet people and people ask me about what I think of it, etc., my standard response is if you approach influencer marketing as a cynic, then it's probably pretty good. In my years in agency, one of the best phrases I ever heard was, where there's mystery, there's margin. And when it comes to influencer marketing, I think a lot of people have worked their butts off to add mystery into something that's pretty simple. And the more mystery they can add into it, the more they can charge for it. And I think it's created this situation where we've had a bit of an overpromise. We have high expectations of what influencers can achieve. There's a bit of confusion around it, and so without sounding too cynical, I think influencer marketing is phenomenal, but what it's phenomenal at is up for debate. So we'll have the different side. But I'm going to start on the cynical side of things, and what I want to do is I want to kind of explain where I think how we got to this point from an influencer marketing point of view, and we need to kind of throw it back before there were influencers and people calling themselves influencers, before social media and even before the rise of the internet. And the way information reached people in the world was through traditional media channels. So we had radio, TV, we had newspapers and magazines, and that information was curated. It was produced by professional journalists, and it was curated by highly skilled, highly qualified editors. And they controlled what information went out and what information didn't go out. And the default, not always, but the default expectation was that the content that you received via these channels was independent, was researched, was carefully considered, and was to a large degree unbiased. Then the internet kind of came along, and platforms like Blogger, and everyone had a blog at one stage. It was the coolest thing to do. And we realized that as ordinary people, we had access to share information. We had the same power, the same tools that these editors had, right? And the newsrooms did panic a little bit. We lost a lot of kind of publications. A lot of media houses closed because they weren't able to keep their revenues up, because people were going, oh, well, we potentially don't need these channels to reach the market. We don't need these channels to share our information. But back in the good old days, pre-internet, the public relations person was the kings and queens of information dissemination on behalf of brands. I was one. I started a PR company, a small tech-focused PR company back in 2002. And our roles were to create content. So we'd write press releases, we'd write thought leadership pieces, case studies. We would put together media launches and media lunches. And Sarah's smiling because Sarah and I did this for way too many years. But as PR people, our role was to engage with the independent media. Our jobs were to get journalists to write positive stories about our clients. But we couldn't pay them because that's unethical. We tried sometimes, but it was unethical. But our job was to try and earn independent media coverage, and hopefully it was positive. A lot of the time we'd get an interview with a journalist, they'd interview our client, we'd send the invoice and the article would be destructive. Like they would tear the client to pieces, and the client still paid you because you still did your work, but you couldn't guarantee the results, you couldn't guarantee the outcomes. But it was a bet that you were willing to hedge, that if you got this right, the audience that were reading this, that were consuming this content, believed that the journalist was independent, and so the content had a higher weighting. It was more influential, and that's what we did. And then as I said, as the kind of disintermediation started happening, and you had the rise of bloggers and these highly kind of, or these people that were able to build these massive audiences and massive platforms themselves, the rules kind of changed a lot, right? And the primary rule that got changed was the production of content and the means of earning revenue went from being separate to being merged. So traditional media would keep an independent editorial team, and as I said, I'm talking as a broad assumption, not all the time, but as a broad assumption, the editorial team was independent, and that publication or radio station or whatever would earn their revenue by selling advertising. And when you opened a magazine, an ad was an ad, editorial was editorial, and if a company wanted to buy editorial, it was advertorial, but it still looked like an ad and you didn't believe it, right? And that's kind of how it went. But with the rise of bloggers and influencers, is the production, the content, and the revenue stream merged. So the content became the revenue stream. So these influencers would go, well, this is great. Like, I don't charge people for advertising. I charge people to say nice things about brands. And this is where the confusion came in, right? Is you start going, well, can I believe it? Can I believe in the editorial independence of a journalist at a high-ranking publication? Well, chances are you could and you should, and chances are you shouldn't with someone who's collecting money to say nice things, right? So that for me is where the confusion came in. In 2006, so I started my agency PR company in 2002. We won clients like Oracle, Symantec, did all of Mark Shuttleworth's PR, which was really cool. But in 2006, I was asked to launch Google in South Africa. And it was phenomenal. Like, I was floored. It was the absolute highlight of my career. Now, I'm telling you this for two reasons. One, it makes me sound really cool. And that's important. Two, launching Google in South Africa and doing Google's PR made me realize something that I'd avoided for all my time in PR. But it was the absolute truth. And the absolute truth is that the PR results that I was able to achieve had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the brand, right? Like a stone with a face painted on it could have done Google's PR when they launched, right? I wasn't writing amazing stuff. I wasn't crafting amazing angles and pitching journalists. I wasn't relying on relationships. I was answering the phone from people like Carte Blanche going, can we interview Google? And you go, yes, book a time. You're a brilliant PR person, right? And that's kind of, and that singular truth has held true for me the entire time. And it's interesting that it's an observation that I have now within the influencer market, is that essentially PR people were these paid influencers for brands in the past, except we had to negotiate with journalists. And no matter how good we are, we couldn't do a good job with a bad product. Right? And when you look at this, when you look at the formula for doing these things, right, is the product itself is the catalyst. The product itself creates influence, not the human being, right? If your product is bad, you're not going to be able to influence anyone, no matter how much someone calls themselves an influencer. And so that's where my cynicism comes in. For me, the word itself is a problem. And when I'm in a bad mood, I generally mock influencers, which is probably not that fair. But the standard rule that I apply is if you call yourself an influencer, you most likely aren't, right? Sorry. The reality is that if you're selling influence means that you can affect a change in someone else. You can cause someone else to act on a certain thing, right? Which is not, I can make someone buy something that they would have bought anyway. It's I can make someone buy something that they wouldn't have bought. Now that's influence. And influencers, as we like to call them in the marketing space, cannot achieve that, right? They can do it like I was with a good PR person. They can do it with a phenomenal product, but they can't do it with a bad product. And if you want to test this, when you engage with them, just say, I'm going to give you a product code and I'll pay you a commission on every, no, I'm out, right? But we're overselling it. And this is where I think the problem is, because I think influencer marketing itself is phenomenal. I think it's powerful beyond measure, but it's not powerful at influence. It's powerful at reach. What influencers are selling is reach. And if we should stop calling them influencers and we should start calling them reachers if it wasn't so creepy. But they're not influencers. These guys are reachers, right? They have phenomenal audiences. They have phenomenal audiences that they've built over the years. And these are audiences that we want to tap into and that we should be tapping into. But we should be looking at it the same way we look at anything else that has reach. We should compare it to billboards and TV and magazines and all that kind of stuff. And then we work out the cost per audience person reached. And we go, cool, like, do we think that works, right? Potentially influencers add in a little bit of authenticity, a little bit of creativity with the content. These are all things that they factor in, but what you're buying is reach, not influence. Only you can add influence. Only your product is the catalyst into that. If you have the right product added to the right reaches, you'll create influence. But the wrong product with the wrong people, there's no influence. The people without the product is not influential, and so on and so forth. So please understand, from a cynical point of view, when you go about this, don't go in thinking that these guys are going to change your world, that they're going to redefine this brand, that they're going to bring in whole swathes of new customers who wouldn't have bought your product anyway. If you measure them up against that yardstick, they're going to fail. And I think that's unfair. If you realize that you're buying a tool that gives you reach, except it has advantages that others don't, like cool creativity, like somewhat authenticity, so on and so forth. But you cost it and you base it on reach. And if you go in that way, if you go in as a cynic and you achieve much more than that, then I think you're going to be stoked with your influencer marketing. Okay, thank you very much.